Hi everybody and welcome to Q&A Wednesday. Yes, you can tell it is cold in my area. I'm like all snuggled up today. But great topic tonight. We're going to talk a little bit. I've talked about this before, and of course I might have some varying opinions out there, but you know what? Can't be helped. We're going to talk about what really is sugar all about and is it really that bad for you? So let's define really quickly. I know I have my notes down here, guys, so you'll just have to, that's just how I roll, guys. I make sure that I have lots of notes and research behind it, but let's define what sugar is really quickly. Sugar, now we're talking about things like table sugar. Now there's a huge difference between simple sugars that come in natural foods such as vegetables and fruits. Obviously that's a whole different ball game because naturally nature has designed it to be like the perfect food for us because the fibers and the product in it, the nutrients slow down the absorption rate of the sugars into our bloodstream. So we're not really talking right now about natural sugar, especially when it comes to things like fruits and produce. So we're talking more about added sugars, but you know, it's really interesting to see people kind of, when we start talking about it, there's varying opinions on how that rolls and what should be included in that. But let's just say for now that anything that is an added sugar, such as table sugar. Now we're talking about things like, this is everything from breads and pastas, because of course those do contain gluten and different types of starches and things that do quickly turn to sugar in your system. So we're going to kind of include that. Let's just, that for all intents and purposes, let's keep it simple and say that anything that is considered an added sugar, such as table sugar, and a highly processed food such as enriched flour. So there's, you know, in general, if you just combine all of highly processed food, we know it's not good for us. I know we try to find loopholes around it, but in general, those cause some serious issues when it comes to what the things do for our body. So really, you know, in reading for this, I found it fascinating how even a lot of dietitians and people who have been very well educated still kind of lump sugar into everything else when it comes to, you know, it is an empty calorie. Like it really is. There is really no nutrient value to added sugar. Sugar, especially table sugar or sucrose, is made up of 1 part sucrose, 1 part fructose, which your body actually works with a little bit differently. The sucrose is actually metabolized and sent to be absorbed or delivered to your cells, and fructose is actually dealt with in the liver. So there's a little bit of difference there, but just in general, neither one is really a super healthy option. And I really did find it interesting that everybody kind of lumped it into like calories. You know, if you look at all of the advertising gimmicks and the things that the soda companies are doing right now, where, you know, all calories matter. Well, yeah, duh. But the problem is you can't lump sugar in with healthier things, right? How sugar responds in the body is a completely different ballgame than, say, an apple. So I find that fascinating that they keep talking about how it's so calorie dense. Well, technically not really. The problem comes into the amount that we tend to consume, and it's not about the calories. Sugar is not about the calories. It's actually about how the body responds to that as a product. So again, that's such a hard one. You really can't just look at calories in, calories out. Sugar is dealt with very specifically in the body very quickly, and over time, that buildup on how the body deals with it becomes a super big problem. Which, of course, all kinds of metabolic issues. We're going to talk about that in just a second. So, I think part of the problem is that there is sugar in everything because it tastes good, right? It's, people love the flavor, you know, and if you look at like highly processed foods, we've talked in the past about the bliss point, how food companies actually design a flavor so that it's technically addicting. It has the right blend of sugar, salt, and mouthfeel, which is of course the fats, so that you want to eat it. So not only does it taste good, which, you know, that's why comfort foods can be addicting because we like the flavor, but it also, the sugars actually release, they mess with our function, our ability, and produces dopamine, right? It actually lights up the same part of the brain as cocaine. So I also find it funny when people say that sugar is not addictive. I completely disagree. I actually read an article where they were comparing how, unlike drug addiction, sugar is, and I thought that is the most ridiculous. That person obviously did not grow up with genetic food issues, right? Like there's some of us that are just more genetically predispositioned to be more addicted to things like sugar because anybody who is susceptible to type 2 diabetes, there's things in our body that respond differently to those sugars. So yeah, I don't know. And half of these comments have no research behind it. So I find that a little bit fascinating. But so let's talk really quickly about some of the downsides to sugar. Now, again, if you're being reasonable, then it's not a big deal. But most of us don't understand what reasonable is because, really the American diet contains so much sugar in varying forms and we don't realize it. Way back when I used to think things like granola bars were healthy. And at one point, no kidding, I actually thought that fruit snacks were actually a healthy option. As a young mom, nobody teaches this. Nobody teaches you what to look for. So a lot of what I've learned had to be partially self-taught because even the nutrition that is given in high school or even in college classes, so much of it is based on old information. Unfortunately, the 80s and 90s did a huge disservice to us when certain research companies and food companies bought off the research companies and proclaimed that fat was the problem with our bodies, that fat was causing fat, and it's not true. It's the sugar that's causing the fat because of how our bodies respond to it. And again, we're going to talk about that in a second. But part of the problem with sugar, now again, for those of you just joining us, we're talking about added sugars. We're not talking about natural sugars like things in fruits and vegetables. We're talking about fructose. Now, sugar comes in so many names. If you look at nutrition labels, the downside to nutrition labels is a couple of things. Number one, if you look at that nutrition label and you're solely looking at the sugar where it says 0 grams, there is a loophole that food manufacturers can use that if that serving size, now again, you got to look at the top to see what that is. Sometimes that's as little as a tablespoon. That's not a whole lot. If the serving size contains less than 0.5 grams of sugars, they don't have to list it. So of course they break all those different sugars up into the different options. So, if you look under the ingredients, which is really where you should be paying attention, you might see agave, fructose, corn syrup solids, sucrose. So there's so many different ways to name it that they can use multiple items and they get past the fact that they don't have to show sugar on there. I find that highly disturbing, actually. You pretty much have to be educated and know what you're looking for because even spices, think about it. Ketchup contains a whole ton of sugar. Spaghetti sauce, salad dressings. Most of us think, fat in the salad dressings. That's actually not the problem. Well, that's not entirely true. If it's contains some like soybean oil and some unhealthy options, obviously that's not great either. But most of them contain a ton of sugar because again, it's that perfect balance of flavoring that keeps us coming back for more. That's how they sell their product. So if you're not careful or you're not really paying attention, you're ingesting way more added sugars in your daily diet than you can even know of. And then you take into consideration things like, Starbucks favorite drinks and man, now you're starting to add up sugar and calories in a product that you're drinking your calories. That makes no sense. You're drinking a ton of sugar. So let's talk really quickly about how your body deals with sugar. So when you eat sugar, especially a simple sugar or really highly refined sugars, it hits your bloodstream pretty quickly. Your body has to deal with it pretty quick, or it becomes toxic in your system. And so what it does is it actually spikes your insulin. And of course, insulin is a traveling agent, right? It helps usher that sugar out of your blood where it's toxic into your cells, which is technically what glucose is supposed to do. Problem being is most of us eat so much that it fills the cells and then there's nowhere else for it to go. So then it starts to be stored in adipose tissue along with some of the other nutrients, including fats that you may have eaten. Jenny says sugar can be evil. Yes, for most of us, unfortunately, I already know myself pretty well. I know that once I get started on sugar, I have a hard time stopping. I definitely have a sweet tooth, love chocolate. So that of course starts a whole cascade of issues. So in general, I don't eat sugar on a daily basis because, well, I used to, and I know the downsides to that because I've seen them firsthand. So let's talk about what the problem with eating too much sugar does. When it does spike insulin, insulin causes weight gain because insulin, again, is a transporter option. It's the hormone that helps take the excess of the nutrients, especially sugar, and usher them into places to be stored. And so when we eat an excess of carbohydrates, especially simple sugars, our body has to immediately deal with them. And that causes weight gain. And of course, over time, that becomes a huge problem. A few weeks ago, we talked about insulin resistance and what's involved in that. And if you look at insulin resistance as it's not that you don't produce enough insulin, it's that insulin has nowhere to put any more sugar. The cells are full. So that becomes a huge problem. So again, then our body still has to deal with it. So we start packing on adipose tissue because it's got to go somewhere. And adipose tissue or fat is the body's storage unit. It stores away all kinds, it stores toxins, anything that your body cannot specifically deal with at the moment, or that the liver can no longer sift through or deal with, right? Because that's kind of our strainer system. So that can be a problem, but it really does cause a cascade of issues. There's a lot of more research than there used to be on how sugar and highly processed food is now involved with things like heart disease. Definitely, especially with like the fructose, fatty liver disease. Now we've got visceral fat, which of course is the fat that starts to invade our organs and our midsection. There's just such issues with that. So, even just over time, like I said, if you're just eating, maybe a small piece of cake on a birthday, but you don't eat that on a regular basis, then it's not that big of a deal. Our body can deal with it. Our body's going to metabolize it. The problem is that the American diet contains so much sugar that now we're even seeing the obesity epidemic and type 2 diabetes in children, whereas type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset. It can no longer be solely that direction, which I find seriously disturbing. Now, if you look at the different types of sugars or starches or carbohydrates, you can't really lump them all together. Oh, Jenny says that she's telling me I have a slight M&M addiction. We already know that. We already know that caramel M&Ms are crack. So we do know I have an M&M addiction. That's why I have none in my house right now. So, there's different types of carbohydrates. Some are better than others. So, when people say, well, I'm just going to cut out all carbs, that's not always the best idea. I tell people, don't just cut carbs, cut out the crap. And there is a difference, right? Because technically fiber is also a carbohydrate, but it's one that we desperately need. We need fiber in our diets to help usher things through, to help lower our cholesterol. There's so many benefits. That would be a good topic. Ooh, I'll have to remember that one. The benefits of fiber. So again, we're specifically talking about things that are more processed. And you have to be careful even with some of the healthier alternatives, because a lot of them do still, your body treats them the same way. However, of course, the more natural items are not quite as condemning as sucrose and table sugar. Well, that is table sugar. So one of the interesting things that I've been reading about, because of course I do a ton of research. Now, of course, I'm not a doctor, so you can't go back and say, well, Melissa's giving medical advice. I'm not. I am telling you that sugar can be a huge problem. One of the interesting pieces of research I've been reading is about how sugar ages the body so much faster in a couple of different ways. Number one, let's see if I can say this right, advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, which is something that actually, so it's a compound that is formed by reactions between sugar and proteins in your body, and it damages your collagen and your elastins, which of course is your, especially with your skin, is your ability to stay smooth and tight and for your skin to bounce back. So obviously sugar can contribute to the fact that your skin will age faster, but it also increases cellular aging. One of the research things that I read had to do with how it browns your organs, just like cooking a piece of meat. I find that fascinating. So it actually speeds up the aging process of all your cells and all your. At some point, your body can't keep turning over those cells as quick as we age, and so of course we're going to age faster, and that's a little disturbing. If you think about it, we talk about anti-aging all the time, but really your best anti-aging tool is eating healthy foods, right? Because we eat for nutrients. We don't just eat for calories. If you really think about it, we talk so much about calories, but that's not really what it is. We eat for the minerals and the nutrients in the foods in order to function correctly. So it gets a little frustrating when I think we really get off track and onto a different focus that isn't the right focus. Number three, it actually destroys your microbiome. Think about that. Sugar feeds the bad bacteria, things like yeast. Then you get something called dysbiosis, which means that your gut health balance is out of sync or out of correct balance. And that's unfortunate because that's your immune system. There's so many things related to your microbiome or your gut health. They do call it the second brain. So any sort of indigestion or inflammational issues can stem from that. So again, by eating too much of a bad thing, because that's really what sugar is, it creates some serious issues. It also has been contributed to certain cancers as well. So that's pretty disturbing that it's promoted so highly, but yet we don't hear about all those side effects and issues that can come through time from digestion of just too much sugar. So yeah, we talked about suppresses your immune system, increases your risk of certain cancers, because I heard once that a doctor described cancer as inflammation traveling from one part of the body to another. And of course, think about all of the different highly allergenic and highly inflammatory things that we ingest inside our system. Sugar is a big one. I fully believe that it contributes to things like, I can't even think at this moment, arthritis. I mean, that's inflammational. So again, by backing off some of those, there's a lot of answers in eating healthier when it comes to solving, curing, and preventing a lot of diseases. We're just not taught to think that way. It's truly unfortunate. It also, there's been studies to show that it increases the risk of depression. It causes I can't even say this right, can I? Neurotransmitter dysregulation and inflammation. That's disturbing. So, people who are struggling with anxiety and depression might need to take a look at their diet. Not that that's a solve-all. Don't get me wrong. You should probably still see your medical provider, but there's no downside to cleaning up your diet. There's no downside to that whatsoever. It drains your energy. For those of us, if you've ever, eaten a candy bar and you feel really great, my sister, I just remember, bless her little heart, I remember as a child, they used to say, no, it's not the sugar, but man, you fed her sugar and she would bounce off the walls for a couple of hours and then crash. So if you've ever eaten like a candy bar and felt really great and man, you're getting things done and then all of a sudden you cannot function, it's because your blood sugar was up here and then it crashed. And of course, when that happens, you want more sugar, right? Because you want to keep feeling that energy level and that's a problem. So, yeah, definitely anyone who struggles with having energy swings, that's hard. There's also links tied to cognitive decline. So things like Alzheimer's, causes plaque in areas that, I don't know enough of that to give you too much information, but I do know that there are there's research that shows that it contributes to that. So keep in mind that, over time, here's the hard thing. I don't think we think about this when we're younger, or maybe even when our children are young, but what we do with our children now will determine how well they are as adults and into their later years. So, it's very possible that people who are experiencing cognitive decline, earlier type 2 diabetes, it starts clear down when our children are born even. There are research that shows that even infant formula contains some sort of sugar in order to addict our babies to sugar. I find that morally repugnant. So, again, it's a thing of supply and demand. I think the food industry should take some responsibility, but we do have to take a responsibility because we keep buying it. And if we weren't buying those things, then of course they wouldn't make it because it wouldn't be making them money. It's a whole hard balance. But for you in general, if you just make some better choices, you can avoid a lot of those pitfalls and things that we as Americans especially are dealing with at this point, that we really kind of contribute to first world countries where, problem, who's got the problem? We're not starving. We definitely aren't starving, but we're dying because of the fact that we have such readily available food, but it's full of crap. So just a couple of tips. I know it's difficult, especially to get off sugar. Sorry, somebody's trying to call me at the same time. How dare they? I know it's difficult to cut sugar out of your diet step by step. I actually find it's easier versus starting to cut things out. It's actually easier to start adding healthier things to your meals. So start adding healthy fruits and vegetables. Now remember that fruits aren't a free-for-all. You don't get to have as many as you want, but they're nutrient dense and they're fiber filled. So of course they're not going to hit your bloodstream the same as a regular simple sugar. Start adding some different vegetables. In my house, we just like trying new recipes to see if we can find a way to make the vegetables try or taste interesting. And it's worked. I've come up with some couple of really good ones, Brussels sprouts. Love that kind of stuff. So my kids are at this point really used to eating vegetables, and we really do pay attention as a family. Again, we don't cut everything out. Once in a while as a family, we have pizza, but we don't do that on a daily basis because we know that, honestly, my body can't handle it. It starts to complain real quick. But I want to teach my children the way to live healthy and have a really quality life for a very long time. Another couple things, pay attention to how you feel when you eat those foods. A lot of carbohydrates that digest quickly will cause bloating. A really great tip that I tell all my clients, if you're going to eat a fruit, eat a protein alongside it. It will slow down the absorption rate of the sugars into your bloodstream. If you think about how the different foods digest in your system and what they do, the combinations start to make a little more sense. So obviously a protein's a highly thermogenic nutrient, has to really heat up to break it down. So not a bad idea to eat like a handful of almonds with, say, an apple, in order to not hit the bloodstream quite as quickly with the sugars, even though it's natural sugar. So, think about it. Shop the outside of the grocery store. Your best bet in eating and maintaining good health is to eat whole, unprocessed food. Of course, as much as you can buy grass-fed, we don't want all of those hormones in our meats. I know that the industry has kind of been going a little away from that, which is good. If you've got wild game in your freezer, great options for proteins. Keep your sugars to your whole foods, your fresh fruits, your vegetables. A little bit of honey has been known as a probiotic. So there's some good options there. Just be reasonable, right? There is no candy bar that is going to be considered a health food item. I don't care what you say. Protein cookies, same page, guys. Same thing with protein ice cream. You guys are still processed food. They still contain a certain amount of sugar. They might be a better option, but that doesn't give you license to eat it as a free-for-all. You're just going to have... Overall, you're going to have some damage done from that. So hopefully that helps. I know you wanted to hear different, that, sugar is the greatest thing in life. It's just not. Use it sparingly. Use it in moderation. Be smart. That's all it really takes in order to just live a healthier lifestyle. So have an incredible evening, you guys. And of course, I get my best ideas from you. So please leave a comment below. You are also welcome to direct message me if you have some questions or some comments or maybe a great idea. I like the fiber idea. I'm going to have to talk about that one. So have a great evening, you guys. And until next time, that's Q&A Wednesday.